Dealers can't move motorcycles. Some Harleys are stickered near $70,000 and sitting for 200+ days. If you ride, your trade-in, insurance, and resale value are already sinking. This isn't a rumor. It's the inventory crisis buried in dealer reports. In the next few minutes, I'll show you why bikes are piling up, how dealers are fighting back, and the models most at risk, plus what you can do in the next 60 days to protect your wallet. Sticker shock on the showroom floor. The gleam of chrome under showroom lights has always been a magnet for riders, but this time, the glow came with a gut punch. A man stood staring at the price tag hanging from the handlebar of a Harley-Davidson touring model. It read $70,000. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again, as if disbelief alone might bring the number down. Around him, other visitors whispered in the same stunned tone. Who can afford this? For decades, Harley had been synonymous with freedom on the open road, yet here was a figure so jaw-dropping it felt absurd. This was not just a motorcycle, it was the price of a suburban house or 2 years of private university tuition. The emotional shock rippled far beyond one stunned customer. Social media lit up with photos of price tags, riders joking that they would need to sell a kidney or take out a second mortgage. What once was an aspirational purchase for a working-class rider now looked like a luxury item designed for Wall Street bonuses. The betrayal felt personal. Riders who had grown up polishing their father's Harley could not even imagine financing one today without crippling debt. The shock was not just about affordability, it was about identity. A Harley was supposed to represent attainable rebellion, the working person's dream of independence. Seeing that dream cost $70,000 reframed the entire culture. If freedom itself had a price tag, Harley had just put it out of reach. But while customers walked away shaking their heads, dealers were left standing beside those unsold machines. And that is where the crisis became impossible to ignore. Dealers buried alive in inventory. Showroom floors once buzzed with anticipation, but now they feel more like mausoleums. Rows of gleaming Harleys stand untouched, their chrome reflecting nothing but fluorescent lights and the silence of customers who never walked through the doors. The problem isn't that the bikes aren't beautiful, it's that they're untouchable at $70,000. Dealers are drowning. Inventory stacks up month after month, while carrying costs suffocate balance sheets. Financing terms are stretched thin, and every unsold Harley feels like a weight dragging the dealership deeper underwater. Rows of unsold road glides, street glides, and CVOS no longer represent pride. They represent debt. One Midwest dealer admitted he'd mortgaged his own home to cover showroom losses. Another in California confessed he's using service department profits just to keep the lights on. They're not moving bikes, they're moving paperwork, begging lenders for extensions while the machines they were told would fly off the floor sit untouched. Dealers staged launches, rolled out chrome, cut ribbons, and still, the crowd stood silent. No cheers, no sales, just rows of untouched bikes gathering dust. Every day those Harleys don't sell, the costs rise higher. Storage, insurance, interest. Each unsold bike turns from asset to liability in record time, and behind that suffocation lay something more painful: betrayal. If you're watching this and shaking your head at those insane prices, hit like so more riders see it. Drop a comment with what bikes cost in your area. Your story might prove just how broken this market really is. Betrayal of the loyal rider. For lifelong riders, Harley-Davidson has never been just a brand. It has been an identity stitched into jackets, tattoos, and family legacies. That is why the surge in prices cut so deep. One veteran rider from Ohio spoke with a bitterness that stung. "I feel abandoned by my own brand. The bike I saved for years to buy now costs more than my house." He was not alone. Across forums and local meetups, the word betrayal surfaced again and again. Loyalty that had taken generations to build was being shattered in a single pricing cycle. Riders described feeling alienated, as if the company had deserted the very community that made it famous. Many said they no longer felt welcome inside dealerships that once felt like a second home. A touring group in Arizona admitted they were considering a collective switch to another brand, something unthinkable just 5 years ago. For them, the betrayal was not just financial, it was cultural. Harley had been the blue-collar dream, the working person's machine. Now it felt like a boutique toy for executives. The pain cut across generations. Sons and daughters who had grown up polishing their parents' Harleys looked at price tags and realized they would never continue the tradition. The badge that once bound families together now marked a divide. That divide spread online, fueling a sense of abandonment and anger. The fracture in loyalty was no longer invisible. It was open, raw, and bleeding. But perhaps the most alarming sign was not in the voices of angry riders. It was in the silent, careful moves of dealers who had begun canceling orders. I've listed the essential gear and accessories down below. Make sure you grab what you need. The first cracks appear. At first it was a whisper. One dealer quietly trimming their next shipment, another negotiating to defer deliveries. Then the whispers grew louder. Dealers across several states were canceling orders, afraid of being buried under bikes they could never sell. Internal memos hinted at fissures between headquarters and the front lines. On one side, executives insisted the luxury strategy would pay off. On the other, dealers saw empty showrooms, dwindling foot traffic, and customers who shook their heads and walked away. The rupture was more than financial, it was systemic. Harley had built its empire on a tight relationship with its dealer network, but now that bond was straining. Each canceled order was not just lost revenue, it was a vote of no confidence. Behind closed doors, some dealers whispered about legal options, while others floated the idea of collective resistance. The first cracks in the wall were visible, and once they spread, the entire structure risked collapse. Behind closed doors, the whispers turned into strategy. Some dealers discreetly reduced floor orders, while others reached out to rival brands, exploring new partnerships. The once unthinkable idea of diluting Harley's dominance became an option. Loyalty had limits, and financial survival was demanding choices that corporate headquarters never anticipated. This was no longer about a few overpriced motorcycles. It was about the survival of an ecosystem. And as the cracks widened, the next question became impossible to ignore. How did Harley let it reach this breaking point in the first place? The cost explosion nobody could dodge. Every surge you felt at the register, parts, service, even gear, started here. Steel doubled, aluminum spiked, chips vanished. The avalanche didn't stop in factories, it crashed straight into the price of every Harley on the floor. Riders weren't just paying more for motorcycles, they were paying more for everything connected to them. The global supply chain became a minefield. Shipping containers that once cost $2,000 to move across the Pacific suddenly demanded $20,000. Energy prices spiked, labor costs followed, and every link in the chain pushed the weight onto the next. By the time it reached the showroom, the burden was unbearable. Harley's leadership told dealers and customers alike this was temporary, a storm that would pass. But the storm became the weather. A shortage of semiconductors meant even basic infotainment modules became luxury items. Raw material contracts locked Harley into higher costs, forcing sticker prices into territory that no working-class rider could justify. For decades, Harleys symbolized attainable rebellion, blue-collar pride roaring down highways. But now the very materials that built the dream became chains on its ankles. A motorcycle once bought with overtime pay or a modest loan now required near executive income. The crisis wasn't just economic, it was cultural. And Harley's answer to this avalanche would change its identity forever. From blue-collar to boutique, Harley once belonged to the factory worker, the soldier home from deployment, the weekend rebel who scraped together enough for a down payment. That identity built the brand. But in boardrooms, a new idea took hold. Harley wasn't a motorcycle company anymore. It was a luxury company. Showrooms traded grease for champagne, hard work for velvet ropes, and working-class roots for exclusivity. Chrome displays gleamed under spotlights, and bikes were posed like jewelry. the atmosphere shifted from community gathering to private gallery. Harley wasn't just selling motorcycles, it was selling status. Price tags confirmed the shift. A motorcycle that once symbolized affordable rebellion now carried the same financial weight as a European luxury car. Harley leaned into the boutique positioning, releasing limited editions, heritage collections, and exclusive drops that mirrored strategies from high fashion more than motorcycling. The company called it brand elevation. Riders called it abandonment. Dealers echoed the tension. Some admitted the showroom experience felt more like a high-end mall than a dealership. "My regulars don't recognize this place anymore," one longtime dealer confessed. "They walk in wearing work boots and walk out feeling like they don't belong." That deliberate alienation fractured the bond that made Harley legendary. Because a luxury brand can't lean on loyalty, it has to lean on prestige. And the moment Harley chose prestige, rivals smelled blood in the water. Rivals smell blood in the water. While Harley leaned into exclusivity, competitors sensed opportunity. Indian, backed by Polaris, launched models that undercut Harley's touring bikes by more than $10,000, often with similar horsepower and comfort. BMW pushed aggressively into the American market, offering German engineering at prices that looked reasonable next to Harley's soaring tags. Meanwhile, electric startups showcased futuristic machines that captured younger riders at half the cost. It became a battlefield of perception as much as performance. Harley stood entrenched in its boutique fort, but rivals flanked them with agility. Indian emphasized heritage but kept prices within reach. BMW attacked with technology, rider aids, connectivity, and reliability. Electric makers ambushed from the side, boasting zero emissions and cutting-edge appeal. Each move isolated Harley further, leaving it looking like an overpriced relic in a market that was evolving around it. Dealers noticed the shift in real time. Customers who once compared Harley against Harley were now cross-shopping across brands. Forums filled with stories of lifelong Harley fans riding away on rivals. The siege was underway, and Harley's boutique gamble looked increasingly reckless. The counter moves felt like ambushes. Indian offered financing packages with lower entry points. BMW flanked Harley with warranties that promised years of worry-free riding. Electric startups positioned themselves as the future, drawing younger riders who had no nostalgic loyalty to Harley. Each play isolated Harley further on the battlefield. But perhaps the most critical blow came not from competitors, but from inside Harley's own forecasting models. The execs miscalculated. You paid more, dealers carried more, and headquarters bet you would keep buying. They called it a bold forecast. Reality called it a disaster. Because when the numbers finally arrived, Harley's gamble collapsed in plain sight. Executives in Milwaukee believed that pushing Harley into the luxury bracket would preserve margins and attract a wealthier customer. They miscalculated the strength of loyalty. Riders who once stretched their paychecks to own a Harley weren't prepared to take out a second mortgage. The so-called prestige buyer Harley targeted was already riding European machines, and they weren't switching. Forecasts assumed that every loyalist would follow the brand into boutique territory. But models that sat at $70,000 didn't just test loyalty, they broke it. Dealers begged for affordable models, warning headquarters that customers were walking. Executives waved them off, convinced demand would catch up. It never did. Dealers watched units pile up, showroom interest dry out, and financing collapse. Each misstep compounded, turning what Harley expected to be a strategic leap into a brutal fall. Hubris poisoned the strategy. Harley didn't just misread the market, they misread their own people. Forecasts became blindfolds, and by the time headquarters realized it, the damage was irreversible. And as dealers burned under the weight of that mistake, rebellion inside the Harley network was about to ignite. The showrooms that went dark. It started quietly, with a single announcement on a local news site. A beloved Harley dealership in the Midwest was shutting its doors after 50 years of business. For generations, that showroom had been a gathering place, a hollow but sacred hall where riders swapped stories and plotted road trips. Now the building stood shuttered, windows dark, the sound of engines replaced by silence. Riders described the loss as if a community landmark had died. One longtime customer said it felt like attending a funeral for a friend. Across the country, more closures followed. From New England to the Southwest, dealers who once thrived on steady turnover found themselves drowning under loans, storage costs, and unsellable premium models. Empty parking lots replaced the rallies that had once filled them with chrome and leather. Staff layoffs left communities grieving not only the loss of a business, but also the disappearance of local jobs that had supported entire families. Each shuttered dealership was a warning sign. The crisis was no longer confined to price tags or consumer whispers. It was eroding the physical presence of Harley-Davidson in towns and cities across America. But the true rupture was not just in lost buildings, it was in the growing hostility between dealers and headquarters. Civil war inside the Harley network. The relationship between Harley-Davidson headquarters and its dealer network had always been uneasy, but the pricing crisis turned unease into outright rebellion. Dealers accused the company of strangling them with impossible allocations and suffocating financial terms. At meetings once marked by cautious optimism, the tone shifted to open mutiny. Owners spoke of being treated as disposable, forced to shoulder inventory that headquarters knew could never sell. Some dealers compared the arrangement to a blockade. They felt trapped, unable to negotiate fair terms, and left carrying the burden of a failing strategy. In hushed conversations, words like lawsuit and collective action circulated. A few whispered of unionizing, not for workers but for franchise owners, a radical idea that showed just how far the rift had grown. The rebellion spread beyond boardrooms. Internal emails leaked onto forums, exposing the depth of resentment. Dealers accused executives of hiding behind prestige language while ignoring financial ruin at the ground level. The once united Harley network began to fracture into factions, those still clinging to corporate promises and those ready to fight back. But while dealers prepared for battle inside the network, another rebellion was forming outside. The riders themselves were leaving in droves. Dealers are openly rebelling, riders are defecting, and we're only halfway through this unraveling. If you don't want to miss where this goes next, hit subscribe right now. The next chapters could change how you see Harley forever. The Great Rider Migration. For decades, Harley's biggest strength was loyalty so fierce it bordered on devotion. But the pricing crisis cracked that loyalty wide open. Riders who once would never have considered another brand began defecting. Stories surfaced of veterans trading their Harleys for Indian bikes that offered similar touring comfort for far less. Others crossed over to BMW, drawn by engineering precision and value. Younger riders, unimpressed by Harley's boutique shift, flocked to electric startups that promised innovation without the crushing price tag. It was more than a shopping decision. It was a cultural exodus. Entire riding groups admitted they were considering migration as a block. Forums filled with posts declaring, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm done with Harley." What had been unshakable loyalty turned into a flood of defections. The sight of once proud Harley jackets showing up at rival events was a painful symbol of the identity shift underway. The exodus showed that brand loyalty was not infinite. When riders felt alienated and deserted, they sought new homes. And their departure carried a warning. If Harley could lose its most loyal base, the financial data was about to expose the collapse in stark terms. When the numbers tell the truth. For months, Harley tried to spin the story, blaming inflation, blaming supply chains, blaming global turbulence. But then the quarterly report landed and excuses no longer mattered. The truth was on paper, in black and white, and it was devastating. Revenue and unit sales cratered together, an implosion too big for spin. Dealer inventories ballooned while sell-through rates collapsed. Financing arms reported record defaults. What Harley painted as temporary turbulence looked more like a tailspin. Investors recoiled. Dealers whispered what the report shouted. Harley wasn't just slipping, it was unraveling. The numbers told a truth loyalty could no longer hide. A brand that once thrived on scarcity now faced abundance of the worst kind. Too many bikes nobody wanted. For every dealer desperate to move units, another customer had already defected to Indian, BMW, or electric alternatives. The damage was systemic, not seasonal. Riders who once took pride in saying they owned a Harley now watched headlines calling the company's strategy a disaster. On online forums, loyalists posted resale values plunging, insurance rates rising, and credit rejections tied directly to inflated sticker prices. Numbers that once told a story of dominance now told a story of collapse. And with data this damning, even the most loyal dealers stopped defending headquarters. Some quietly began to plan their revolt. Competitors rewrite the playbook. When Harley faltered, rivals wasted no time rewriting the chessboard. Indian unveiled a new line of touring bikes priced well under $30,000, calling it a reset for riders who wanted muscle without mortgaging their future. BMW doubled down on its strategy of combining German engineering with competitive pricing, offering technology-rich packages at a fraction of Harley's boutique models. Meanwhile, electric makers accelerated their launches, betting that younger riders would view innovation and affordability as a winning combination. The playbook shifted almost overnight. Where Harley had aimed for prestige, others moved toward accessibility. Manufacturers emphasized financing options, warranty extensions, and value-driven marketing. Dealerships from rival brands leaned into the message, "Why pay $70,000 when you can pay $30 and ride tomorrow?" It was a counter-move that resonated deeply with riders who felt betrayed by Harley's pivot to exclusivity. This market reset sharpened Harley's isolation. Instead of leading the industry, it was now the outlier, standing alone in a shrinking corner of the board. Every counter-move from a competitor reminded consumers that the motorcycle market still had choices, and those choices were often smarter, cheaper, and more practical. And while rivals reset their playbooks, lawmakers began to see the Harley crisis not only as a market battle, but as a political spectacle. When politics rumbles into the fight, the affordability crisis inside Harley-Davidson soon reached Capitol Hill. Lawmakers from industrial states argued that motorcycle jobs were at risk, and hearings were proposed to investigate whether Harley's pricing strategy was sustainable or exploitative. Some politicians floated subsidies for domestic manufacturers to prevent further dealership closures, while others pushed for tariffs on imported parts, framing the issue as a battle for American industry. Theater took over the conversation. At rallies, union leaders spoke of Harley's missteps as a warning for all manufacturers. Senators debated whether corporate greed was eroding American mobility. News outlets framed the conflict as a showdown between Wall Street-driven executives and Main Street communities. For politicians, it became a stage where they could defend workers, court voters, and score points. But beyond the spectacle, real policies loomed. Tariff adjustments, subsidy proposals, and regulatory reviews all became part of the discourse. Whether or not they passed, the very fact that Washington was now weighing in signaled that Harley's crisis had escaped the showroom floor. And while politicians sparred in public, dealers themselves were preparing something unprecedented, an uprising from within. The dealer uprising. Across the Harley network, whispers of revolt hardened into plans. Dealers who once competed with each other began meeting behind closed doors, exploring ways to apply collective pressure. Some proposed forming a formal association with union-like leverage. Others discussed lawsuits aimed at loosening the contracts that bound them to corporate mandates. The once unthinkable idea of a dealer uprising was now on the table. The mood was raw. Owners described themselves as barricaded inside showrooms, forced to picket against the very company whose name hung above their doors. Meetings that once celebrated new product launches now sounded like strategy sessions in a revolt. The bond between Harley and its retail partners, already strained, threatened to snap entirely. Pickets outside a few dealerships drew local news coverage. Workers carried signs that read, "We can't sell what America can't buy." The imagery was powerful. The supposed stewards of Harley's brand standing in public opposition to headquarters. It was not just a financial crisis anymore. It was a labor movement in miniature, driven not by factory employees but by the very people who kept Harley's network alive. And as dealers barricaded and riders defected, the question no one could avoid came into focus. What prophecy awaited Harley-Davidson's future? The prophecy of Harley's future. Rebirth or downfall, nothing in between. That was the stark assessment offered by one analyst as Harley's predicament reached its climax. The company now stood at a fork in the road. On one side lay a reckoning. If Harley clung to its boutique gamble, it risked collapsing into irrelevance, remembered only as a brand that abandoned its core. On the other side lay the chance of destiny renewed, a humbling return to accessibility, rebuilding loyalty from the ground up. Investors watched closely, wary of a potential implosion, but also aware that a successful pivot could reignite growth. Consumers weighed their options, some hoping Harley would return to its roots, others already committed to rival brands. Dealers, once loyal soldiers in Harley's empire, now demanded concrete action before committing to another season. The prophecy was not simply about one company. It was about the entire motorcycle industry, about whether American brands could balance prestige with affordability in an era of economic strain. For Harley, the reckoning would define its destiny. For riders, it would determine whether the badge on their jackets remained a symbol of freedom or became a relic of a lost era. And as the world waited, one truth lingered. The open road never forgives hesitation. The road ahead for Harley-Davidson isn't just about motorcycles. It's about identity, loyalty, and the future of riding itself. Dealers are pushing back, riders are walking away, and rivals are rewriting the rules. So I want to hear from you. What are bikes selling for in your area? Are riders in your circle sticking with Harley or switching brands? Drop your story in the comments, because together we can show just how deep this crisis runs. And if you don't want to miss where this story goes next, hit like, smash that subscribe button, and turn on notifications. Because the fight for Harley's future is far from over, and you'll want to be here when the next chapter drops.